Thanks, everyone. Okay, so welcome everyone to this workshop on working with Cafcass, and we're going to take a look kind of behind the curtain by speaking to Andy, who previously worked for Cafcass, and will be able to share some insight for you guys that will help you with your cases. So Andy, do you want to just quickly introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about yourself and your experience, and then we'll get onto the juicy stuff.
Thank you, sir. Yes, so professionally, I'm a social worker. I'm also a trained life coach. I've kind of approaching sort of 40 years. You wouldn't believe it, would you? As a social worker, mainly, well, yeah, child protection social worker, children and family social worker. 15 odd years in Brighton, the Hove area. And then the last 22 years, I worked for Cafcass. The first 4.5 of those years, I did mainly public law work as a children's guardian. Absolutely loved it. And then I went into management and got involved in training, coaching, auditing. So I joined a national team that its kind of remit really was to enhance and promote, improve the quality, the standard of practice in Cafcass. So I was involved in preparation for Ofsted and things like that. So I was right at the beginning of Cafcass, and I left, taking sort of early retirement, if you like, at the end of July last year. So I've only just left. I'm sure things have changed quite a lot since I've left. I really need to keep up to date what's going on. Things change so quickly in Cafcass. But I was there right from the start, and seeing lots and lots of changes. So at the end of July, what I did was I set up my own business, Child Arrangement Support Services, and set myself up as a freelance family called mentor or child arrangements coach, I'll call myself. So the aim really is to help anybody at any stage with their child arrangements, either pre-court or even support after court. But a lot of my work is helping parents through court proceedings. So I kind of cheer them on, I kind of mentor them through that, whether they have a solicitor or don't have a solicitor. I'm not legally trained. I know a bit about the family law, but I don't give legal advice as such. But my unique kind of position, I guess, is my experience with Cafcass. 2017, myself and a colleague invented the Cafcass Positive Parenting Program, which some of you may have heard about, which is an award-winning program as an alternative to a Section 7. So it was therapeutically working with parents to reduce conflict and improve communication. And part of that involved children writing letters directly to their parents about their experiences. So I brought all of that with me. Working on my own is absolutely fantastic. But I say I'm in a unique position to help parents, particularly with Cafcass, working with Cafcass and the interviews as well. So my website, I added some pages on some general top tips on how to work with, how to prepare yourself for interviews with Cafcass. So that's one of the things that I do with parents is I have a meeting with them before the Cafcass officer comes along and help them prepare, for that meeting to make sure they get the most out of it, because it's such, there's crucial points in the proceedings, and a big one is when your Cafcass officer comes to your house.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to kind of delve into some of those areas as we go through. So, so the first thing that I wanted to ask, particularly with relation to obviously the people that are on this call, the majority of the parents that I work with and the majority of people that are on this call, is they're working with an ex who they identify as being abusive. They think that they are a risk to the child on some level, and many display alienating behaviours. So if you could explain to us, how do Cafcass evaluate those things so that so that parents can understand what are Cafcass looking for in those sorts of cases?
Yeah. Well, I mean, at the beginning, when Cafcass was formed, the private law was addressed by the old welfare officers who came from probation. And their kind of remit really was about trying to get agreement for contact arrangements. So, as they said, we don't do safeguarding. So it was a bit of a rude awakening for a lot of practitioners in the early 2000s when this concept of safeguarding came in, and we did, Cafcass did police checks and local authority checks. So where Cafcass is now, safeguarding is one of the big parts of their what they call the Together framework, their kind of concept of how they work with families. So their aim is to do comprehensive, fair assessments. And one of the things that makes it kind of will be on the Cafcass officer's mind, the FCA's mind, is that their work might be QA'd by a manager or someone in the improvement team or even by Ofsted. And what they really don't want is to be criticised for a lack, a paucity in their risk assessment, their safeguarding, so that they make sure they've done all the checks, but also that they've used the right kind of tools to assess the risk factors. So all the questions that they ask the main ones will be about harm and understanding harm. So they have tools to help with that. They have some training to help them with that. And they have frameworks, or the CAP is a kind of a child arrangements framework, which for private law set out kind of blocks, kind of areas of kind of risk factors that they needed to focus on, and it provided kind of guidance for that. So there'll be one on domestic abuse and domestic abuse parkway. You may have heard about that. That's recently been updated last year. Controversial in some areas. Cafcass has had quite a journey with domestic abuse. A lot of criticism politically from Women's Aid and others about historically how they haven't understood it, how they've made some recommendations perhaps unsafe. So the domestic abuse pathway has been updated. That's very much kind of a reaction to that. And then there's parental conflict, and Cafcass kind of learnt that parental conflict and domestic abuse are two separate things and needs to be assessed in different ways, and the responses need to be very different. It's not safe to conflate those, although a lot of the kind of behaviours that you see could be quite similar. So there's domestic abuse, parental conflict, and then there's kind of other areas of abuse. They look at drug abuse, alcohol abuse, mental health, and the fourth one is what they would call child refusal and child resistance. So when a child doesn't want to see a parent, and they had quite a good little tool for trying to look at the reasons for that, because there's all kinds of reasons why a child doesn't want to see a parent, and one of those might be parental alienation, so that a parent is coaching, influencing, however subtly or not subtly, the children not to see or not to have a positive relationship with the other parent. Cafcass has struggled with that over the years. It's been highly kind of debated whether there's parental alienation syndrome, whether that exists or not, or be looking at behaviours. And I think it's still an area that Cafcass kind of was struggling. They were struggling in actually saying, yeah, this is alienating behaviours. And quite rightly, you should leave it to the court to make those kind of judgments. Yeah, so safeguarding, the risk assessment is at the very sort of heart of what they do. And if you look at the Section 7 report, which is the main welfare report that they have to file to court, it is based on the welfare checklist that goes back to the 89 Act. And the welfare checklist does stipulate that one of the questions is what harms the child suffered, what's the likely harm. So they will want to ask questions about harm. They will want to know about the impact as well. So it's not just, have you been harmed? Do you feel that there's any risks? But what's the impact on you? What's the impact on your child? What's the impact going forward? And also to look at a plan, a safety plan, safety management plan. What can you do? It's one thing to measure the risks. Say, for example, there's horrendous arguments and threats doing a handover, one child, one parent to the next parent, well, you need a management plan. So maybe it's done in public, maybe third party takes an involvement in that. So that's kind of sort of very clear example. One of the tips I think that I would say when being interviewed by a Cafcass officer who will have these questions about harm is to kind of feed them the information that you make sure you have that list of examples where there have been harm or you felt at risk. And it's important they should be thinking, but it's also good for you to think about what was the worst time, what was the last time, is there a pattern, what's the impact? And as a manager, one of the things that I used to look at was how certainly how it impacted on the individuals. What are the chances that there's going to be any change? What would you do to change? But one of the terms that they like to use was behavioural detail. So they can't just say mother has a mental health problem or dad has a drink problem. They have to give more detail about that. About what exactly is the mental health problem? What's been prescribed? What is the drink problem? When the parents were together, did they drink together and that seemed okay? But now that they're separated and in conflict in court, suddenly has that become a big kind of issue, and dad suddenly has a drink problem. So you can help them with the behavioural detail and give them examples, show them examples, and you can almost play bingo, really. You can kind of tick them off as they appear in the report. So, oh yes, now I gave them this lovely example, I gave them this quote, and it appears in the report. So you're kind of helping them out, really, but also kind of making sure that that the things that you feel are important are actually included.
So in terms of, so obviously with the process with Cafcass, you have that initial meet with them, which is very short. It's just very basic checks. At what point should parents be introducing this and bearing in mind the trauma that they are experiencing from the relationship, from the post-separation abuse, whether that be alienating or coercive control of them or the child, however it's presenting? When and how should they present what they believe to be this risk and their abuse story, without, because I think a lot of them are quite what tends to come up is this term parental conflict, which can feel quite demeaning to parents if they feel they're not the one bringing the conflict. Actually, they're the one that's had years and years of being controlled in everything. So how do they present those risks, those concerns, without then being labelled as being the one bringing the conflict, but equally wanting to be solution focused, wanting to move forward, but not ignoring the risk to the children? What's the balance? How do they strike the balance with that? Because it comes across so often that it's those nuances are really missed by a lot of FCAs in these cases. And I'm not here to criticize at all. I want to understand. That's what this whole thing is. We want to understand so that the parents can present themselves a lot better by understanding the system that they're working in. So any tips and advice around when, where and how?
Yeah, balance is a really key concept to keep in your head, really. But I think it starts with the application or your response to the application, and any early decision statements, so setting that out. And there are your relationship, your time spent with Cafcass is actually quite limited. And there are two kind of key points which you need to kind of mark on your calendar as kind of really big opportunities, seamless opportunities. And the first is that safeguarding interview, which is like between 20 minutes and an hour. And that will be a telephone call. They will have an agenda, they will have a script, if you like, of questions that need to ask. And those questions are mainly around safeguarding. So they will do the police checks, they'll do the local authority checks, but they will have to ask, even if it doesn't appear, about mental health, about domestic abuse, about parental conflict, drug abuse. They would have to ask all those questions. So the first sort of tip really is to make sure that you've written down, you've got your list, just in case they don't ask the questions, that you can tick off to say, when that conversation ends, you have said what you need to say, that you've told them what you need to tell them. And the second one is the interview. If it goes to a Section 7 report, then you may be interviewed at home, you may be interviewed in the Cafcass office. But that's more of an opportunity to meet in person the Cafcass officer. So that kind of question of balance is, you really don't want to present yourself too much as a victim, and so they can start thinking in their head, actually, this person's making it up, this person's exaggerating. But you want to balance that with making sure that they really get the key facts. They're not going to be interested too much in the history of your relationship, the marriage breakdown, or the reasons. They should include some of that, and I would certainly give them a summary of that. But they really want to get to the children. And previously, when I was QAing reports, I would criticize reports that were too parent-focused, if you like. So, and if I saw a report that had a heading like with mum's name and then a heading with dad's name, it tended just to regurgitate things that they said in the interview, and they can be in position statements. So there was a kind of a shift of wanting to talk more about the children, and parents could feel, actually, well, they don't really care about me. And this was the important part of the Cafcass Positive Parenting Program, is that it gave more time for parents to tell their story. And my assumption was that if you don't feel heard, you're not going to move on. So it's really important to be able to tell your story, to be heard, what it was like, and for the Cafcass officer to show some empathy, some understanding about what it was like to be in your shoes. Yeah, giving behavioural detail, making sure that you do give them kind of clear examples, clear evidence of when things were at their worst, how that made you feel, what fears you still have now. And again, my last point on balance is, very few people in this world are 100% bad. And one of the things that they have to include in their report is strengths within the family. And so I think it's good for you to present that, actually, this other person who you had a relationship with, you were married, you had children with, maybe, that there may be some good things about them. Maybe they were a husband that you couldn't respect, that you lost trust in, but maybe there's some good aspects to the parenting. Maybe they were quite good at playing with the children. So it's important to say some positive things, whilst making sure that that doesn't overshadow all the things that they need to know about in terms of the risks. And this shows that you're not just trying to devalue the other person just to get your case across, that you are a balanced person, that you are centered on the needs of the children. And so part of that interview, I think it's important to get across that you do promote co-parenting, that you do understand that it's in the best interest of children to have a positive relationship with both parents, and that you're doing your best to make sure that happens. So maybe you've considered using a parenting app, or you've attended Parenting Together for Children course, or you've tried to go to mediation, or you've tried to get a parenting plan, and to kind of say that's what you want. Now, you may want to follow it up by saying, but your partner hasn't really engaged in mediation, but your partner is putting kind of difficulties in the way. So it's important for the Cafcass officer to hear that you are actually trying to promote co-parenting. You're not someone standing in the way. So that helps remove in their mind this idea of parental alienation, that the other parent is inconvenient to you and you wish that they just disappeared and the papa spoke. Maybe you've got a new partner and the new partner's called dad or called mum. Presenting that kind of balance approach, that you would want there to be good co-parenting, good communication, reduced conflict, because you can see it's best for the children. But there are reasons why you're not experiencing that. Maybe you're getting harassment, maybe the family's joining in, maybe every time you try and mediate and talk to the other partner, they're playing games, they're not being involved. So make sure that you create that kind of picture for the Cafcass officer, so it's crystal clear for them exactly what kind of life you've been living.
Okay, so I think what happens for a lot of parents in this is they do that. They'll have that initial 20-minute chat and they'll tick them off their thing and say, I think I've told them that, and they'll say, oh, I think that went really well, and then they speak to the other parent and then they get a report which doesn't reflect the conversation that they felt that they'd had, where they had been heard and they had put their concerns across. Suddenly the report is filled with everything the other parent has said, and that balance that we talk about the parents offering seems to then get lost within that, you know, that initial safeguarding report, but also, you know, that can pass down. So what at that point, if they feel that that report, that initial, you know, that first contact is almost going down a pathway where they're not being listened to as much, the other parent's narrative is being given more credence, is there anything that a parent can do? You know, I think a lot of people struggle with, do I complain? My personal thing is I'm quite wary of that, because I think it's about trying to work together with the FCA rather than alienate yourself from the process. But what can they do to kind of say, I'm disappointed that this has been left out, that this, you know, we discussed this and it's been left out. Why isn't this included? If they feel that that's happening, is there anything they can do? What advice would you give to someone in that position? We can't hear you at the moment, Andy. No, it's not working. Can everyone just make sure they've got themselves on mute? I can't hear you. Can anyone pop in the chat whether they can hear Andy or not? If it's just a me problem. Is that mine? Yeah, no one can hear you. Don't know why it suddenly dropped out. Technology. Do you want to come out and come back in again and see if that helps? Still can't hear you. If you come out of the call and then come back in again, maybe it'll just kickstart it.
Okay.
Oh, there we go.
Oh, am I back in now?
Yeah, can hear you now.
Oh, lovely.
Thank you.
Oh, great. Yeah.
Technology.
Yes.
Thanks, everyone. Oh, it's gone again. Oh.
Can you?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Sorry, it's in and out.
So the things are, they are professional social workers, they're trained social workers, but they're human beings as well. So when they come to see you, they might be under huge pressure because they've had an argument with a manager or colleague. They've got something else on their mind that's brewing. They've got timescales. It may be something's gone on at home for them. Maybe they've been ill. So there's all kinds of kind of human things that impact on them. And maybe some things about your case trigger them. Maybe they've had separations themselves. Maybe they recognize things in personalities and individuals. So that's not something you can do a great deal about, really. Other than I would say that the first thing you need to do is to work on that rapport, really. So the moment they come knock on your door, even if you're feeling anxious and you're a bit worried, but greet them, make them feel comfortable, offer them a cup of tea, because they can actually form an opinion on you. They may already have formed an opinion from you from other things they've read and heard, but they will form an opinion about you from the moment they clap eyes on you. They're human beings, so it's so important to work on that. Then in terms of the reports, I wouldn't get too worried if you look at the report and you think, well, there's 3 paragraphs about my ex-partner and only 1 about me. Are they biased? That may not be the case. You may think, I gave them loads of information. Half of it is in the report. They will hopefully record it in the files, but they don't put everything in the report. So I wouldn't get too worried. It's more about what they say and what they don't say, really, and how they may misquote you. So in terms of complaints, if there are kind of factual errors, it's important to share that with the Cafcass officer straight away, really. And factual errors you might have, like dates of birth wrong or names wrong, or I had a Section 7 report recently where the parent said, well, they're suggesting I go to a contact centre because I haven't seen my child for a year and we need to be introduced. But I saw them 3 months ago. So, well, must be getting confused. And I, I then said, "Oh, have you noticed that who's this child that they're talking about in the report?" So, I don't know. I haven't. What do you mean? I said, "Well, go to this paragraph." And they started writing about a different child. So clearly, what they've done is cut and pasted from another report something into that report, which makes you think, was that unique report? Are they treating my family as a unique situation? So yeah, if it's factual, certainly I would share that. It's not a complaint as such. I would keep complaints mainly kind of after the proceedings, towards the end of the proceedings, about kind of conduct and behaviour, really. Not that you disagree with them, because you're not going to win in that case. But if you've got evidence that they, were difficult with you, I would. If there's anything you disagree about the assessment, that's what you're going to have to challenge it in court.
Okay, so things like where the ex has misreported something, so sort of made an allegation to Cafcass that wasn't true, but has been put in the report as if it did happen.
Yeah.
Do they wait to challenge that in court, or do they go back to the Cafcass officer themselves and say, actually, I've got evidence that disproves that? Because that's obviously false allegations are massive in these cases. The ones that are primarily the guys that are on this call. These are those real high level conflict in terms of, one side particularly bringing it. But, to me, conflict is two people not agreeing on something. So, there is high conflict from both parties if you're not agreeing on something. But the term itself feels very equally blaming, when sometimes actually you're just you're trying to keep yourself safe as much as anything. But yeah, so would they go back to the FCA and say, I've got evidence that would you like to see the evidence that disputes that? Or is it wait until you get in court and then your legal team or yourself, if you're representing, challenge that? And you actually use it as evidence.
Yeah, so in family proceedings, there's at least two perspectives. There could be several more. And that is it is difficult for the practitioner, because you go and see one parent. I've done this myself and thought, yes, I can absolutely see why they said what they said. And then they go and see the other parent and go, oh, hold on a minute, this is completely different. So what they should be doing, if we're talking about really serious issues of like domestic abuse, well, they're all serious really, but if there are issues of domestic abuse and you see yourself as the kind of the victim of domestic abuse, you need to make sure that you are interviewed first. Because if they go and interview the alleged perpetrator first, then they will come up with all their minimization, all their excuses, and they have that in their head, and they come to you with that. It's much better that they meet you first, or this practice-wise, that's what they should be doing, so that you can give them information that they can go and challenge the other person with. That may not always happen because practitioners don't always understand that, but also they may just be interviewing the other parent first because it's more convenient to them, because they couldn't get hold of you and they've got a tight time scale. And I think that is quite dangerous. So they should, when they are allocated the case, the FCA should contact you with a welcome letter, send a welcome letter to your children as well, and start to diarise appointments. So if you can have that early communication with them before they come round, you could ask them. I would ask them, who you seen first, when you seen my ex-partner. I think those are quite reasonable questions to ask.
That's good to know.
Where do they want to see you? Do they want to see you at home? Do they want to see you in the office? And I think if you've got issues about home conditions of things, you really want them to come and see you at home. It's really good if you try and get them to come and see you with the child as well, so that you've got the advantages of showing that the relationship, the attachment you got with the child. And if your parent, particularly if you live some time away, sometimes they would even conduct the Section 7. Well, increasingly since COVID, they would do just another telephone call. And I've had some dads like that. And maybe it's just because Cafcass officer doesn't want to go and see them, they haven't got time, or they live too far away and they don't want to get another team involved, they don't want to travel, they haven't got the time to travel. but it's a massive disadvantage. If you go and see one parent face to face and see them with their children, and then you see another parent with, I've got someone saying, well, they spent an hour with my partner and 20 minutes with me on the phone. You kind of think you want to lose this straight away, really.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you can kind of manage that as best you can. So in terms of your question about that's something for the hearing for a legal representative or to represent yourself if you feel that there's been a misrepresentation or things kind of misquoted. So I would keep the early complaints just down to the actual factual errors.
Okay.
They just won't be interested. They don't want to get, once they've met you, they move on to something else.
Yeah.
They write the report. They're really not, they just get annoyed if you keep ringing up or keep emailing them. And another thing, and I've got another thing, that's why preparation is so important. Make sure they do not leave your house until you've said everything you want to say about the child's needs, about your concerns, about the outcomes that you think are important. They need to get those very clear, because you don't want to then be ringing them up later, because either they won't talk to you, or they just be annoyed because they've got other things to do, and you're going to be branded as an awkward parent.
Mm. So just to reiterate, and I'm sorry, I did forget to say this at the start, so for those of you who came late, can you save your questions and your comments until the end when we do the Q&A, because they're popping up on the screen and my eyes are getting drawn to it and I don't want to get distracted from what Andy's saying. So if you just save them till I give you the space to do that, it just means that, like I say, I'm not getting distracted and it's not going on in the chat where I'm not monitoring the chat. So if you can just hold them, make a note of any questions that you have, and we'll come back to them. So I just want to go back a little bit. In a lot of these cases, emotional manipulation of the child is primarily what is happening. One, is it understood by Cafcass and Cafcass officers in terms of, do they receive specific training on that? What are they looking for? And secondly, is it relevant? Do they see it as having a weight that is similar to physical abuse? Or so where does it sit in terms of when they're assessing risk? Where does emotional manipulation sit? So first off, do they recognize it? Are they trained on it? What are they looking for? And second off, where do they then, if they do recognize it, where are they putting it? Are they recognizing it as high level?
If it's obvious, it's easy, really. So if they're meeting their child and the child sort of takes a piece of paper out of their pocket and they've got a long list of things that they read to you, or they kind of use language that you think, actually, where do they get that from? How do they know about that? They can only be told by one parent, or it's clearly these are the things that they've been asked to say. But again, that's very difficult, because I've worked with children who are very erudite, very good at speaking, and it's easy to say, oh no, they've been told to say these things. Well, we don't know that. So in most cases, it's really difficult. And it would depend on the practitioner, unfortunately, what training they've attended. There's basic training for all new Cafcass officers, and they will be trained in interview techniques. But as a trainer myself, you didn't spend hours and hours and hours talking about it. There were like a few slides where you would mention about children. How would you tell that they're not being influenced? Because it's so difficult and it's very complex, because obviously a child living with one parent, they can become aligned with that one parent. It's understandable, they become loyal and have this attachment with that parent, and they will pick up all kinds of subtle cues from that parent. It just has to be a look. So they come back from contact, and they might, they will know that they don't want to say what a great time they've had to, the parent say, how did you get on? Oh, it's all right. And they think, oh, well, they clearly don't like contact. But the child has learned already that the parent doesn't want to hear that they've had a good time. So they pick up very quickly on the conflict, and they're very sensitive to how a parent feels. So it's not always a case of one parent influence telling the child, this is what you've got to say, I'm coaching you. Those examples do happen, but more often is a child becomes aligned with one parent, it becomes loyal to one parent, it hears their story, it feels their story becomes their story. and it's very hard for the other parents. So most cases, I would get the parents saying, I've been alienated against. They clearly coach, and it's so much more complex than that, really. And
Well,
it's very
absolutely.
hard.
And when there's, when you've got a parent who's saying that they've experienced coercive control, that's, what you just described there of the environment that the child's living in, they're learning what to think and feel about the parent. That is coercive control of the child, which, is alienation. Those are part of alienating behaviors. And I appreciate that it's, we're all walking emotions. We can't not have them. And so, it's a difficult line to be able to say someone is deliberately turning a child against the other parent when it's like more unconscious than that. But ultimately, that child's opinion of that parent is being unfairly changed, not from their own experience. So actually, that's affecting their development as a child, because they're not having an authentic experience with one parent. They're having a proxy experience through the eyes of the other parent, which is very harmful. And obviously this can become the bedrock of alienation, because then it's easy to jump on those when the kid starts, because they've learned I'm not meant to enjoy contact. The kid can then easily be pushed in saying, actually, I don't want to go to contact, don't want the relationship, when it's been, and that's what happens a lot, is that drip of negativity towards the other parent, either through the environment, through what they hear talking to Nan about, or what they hear the mention to someone in the co-op. They're hearing that all the time. It's being fed in. But again, for the other parent and ultimately the child, their ideal, that arena for them to thrive in is relationship with two healthy parents. That's being worn away by someone, either consciously or unconsciously. And so again, how do Cafcass measure that? How do they view that in terms of like the abuse scale kind of thing? Where would that fit in terms of the impact on contact, that kind of thing?
It's very difficult, because as a parent will obviously have their own feelings about the ex-parent. They've let them down. They feel disrespected. They feel that they can't respect them. They can't trust them anymore. And then that gets confused with how they are as a parent. So I can't trust you because you had an affair. So I can't trust you as a parent, but actually they might be a very good parent. So those feelings you have about the ex-partner is obviously going to be shared with the child. Now, in terms of how Cafcass understand that, I think that is always going to come down to the individual practitioner, how experienced they are, how good they are at making judgments, what kind of training they've had. What we've had in recent years is a lot of that cohort of experienced kind of ex-probationers. They've all moved on. They've retired. Maybe they became managers. So there's a lot more younger, inexperienced practitioners coming into Cafcass who've had very little experience of private law, who've come into Cafcass wanting to do the sexy public law, really, and they find themselves doing private law, and they will be given, in many cases, they'll be given private law cases before they're sent out to do public law and adoption cases, because it's seen as easier. And it's much harder. It's much easier to assess a baby with a broken clavicle in a public law case than it is to assess two parents in private law who are making cross allegations and you're not quite sure what's what. So it really does sharpen those assessment skills. So with the way that kind of Cafcass has developed, and this quite rightly wants to become a child-centered organization, the child voice is so important. What they've lost is that fuller understanding of what it's like to be a parent. And if you come in with a lack of experience and with a certain concept about what private law is, kind of what I've seen is that it can feel like a disrespect with, but not really understanding or kind of caring what it's like to be the parent and be able to put yourself into those shoes. So they bring that kind of authoritative kind of social work approach that they would have in public law. They really don't kind of get as much as perhaps they used to what it's like to be a parent in private law, and to understand that those parents are the experts on their children and they have parental responsibility. So I think that's something that's been lost in Cafcass over the years, that kind of subtle kind of understanding of the issues in private law. So I'm quite skeptical really about the ability to really finely tune your assessment so you fully kind of get to the bottom of whether a child's been coached or not. And I say in the clear cases, like a child who raced out of the school across the playground to meet their dad when dad was in court, saying, "Dad, did we win?" You know, clearly that child is being really influenced by the father, and it's shared into what's going on at court. And so there's some really kind of clear, but most of it is very kind of muddy and makes it very difficult for practitioners to understand. So they either avoid it, or they fudge it, or they kind of get it wrong. And this is, I'm afraid, it puts emphasis on the parents and their legal teams to make sure that the court actually get that story and backed up with evidence.
That's so interesting, Andy. Thanks so much. I think that, I don't know about it for anyone else on the call, and I will open up the chat, but I've got goosebumps because I kind of think that there's so much emphasis put on parents working with Cafcass because they seem to have so much sway with the court. And yet on so many of these cases, what you're saying is actually do that and try and get it as best as you can, and not fall into common mistakes, and don't understand the system, but also be aware of the limitations of the system and focus on the legal side of it, and present anything that Cafcass haven't picked up. Yeah, don't worry too much. You can present that within the court process. Have I interpreted that correctly? Because that's how it felt.
Yeah.
I just want to double check that I haven't.
Yeah, there are some courts that you can feel. I've had cases recently where they can feel, they can understand the argument, but they say, "Well, I can't go against the Cafcass report." There are others more likely to be judges than magistrates, I would say, who are more confident, who would say, "No, quite clearly, this Cafcass report is bonkers, and I'm going to put it aside, or I need a new one." But it is a bit of a lottery, really, or whether you get a Cafcass officer who it doesn't have to be experienced, but someone who's a good judgment of character, who's very balanced, who does put the principles that Cafcass say are important, these ideas of diversity, of equality, of kindness, really does actually put those into practice. Or someone who's perhaps younger, less experienced, risk averse because they're worried about getting told off, and worried about making bold decisions, so they keep very much to the status quo. I'm not going to recommend change of residence, even though it's obvious that that's what needs to happen, because I don't want to kind of stick my neck out too much. So examining the reports are really important to see the language that they're used, and to see what's kind of missing as well. And I think that's what I can bring as a family mentor, because I've read thousands of the reports. I can say what's missing. I can say what's meant by the language. So if a report says that we're not recommending fact finding because it's not proportionate and it's not necessary, well, they've taken those words straight out of practice direction J12. But I would want to see, what's your evidence for that? Are you just using that because you don't want a fact finding? And there's been cases where I've had to help the parents push for fact finding because it's pretty obvious that they do need fact finding. They can't move on without it. And these are harsh lessons. Cafcass has swung backwards and forwards about fact finding, about making sure that practitioners always recommend it, or kind of look at it properly, or perhaps they're recommending it too much and courts are not going to go for it. So I think they will always struggle with whether fact finding should be recommended or not.
And I think because of the court delays and the backlog, we're seeing less and less fact findings wanting to be taking place because of the length of time they take. And their I can't remember the name of the case law, but it's almost like a bypass of the fact find. Like they're essentially saying, we're not doing that because of this case. I think it's J&J or L versus L or something like that. I can't remember it, unfortunately. But they kind of use that to bypass the fact find. But unfortunately, in cases like this, which tend to go on for multiple years, a fact find can provide a really useful factual matrix for what's going on for the family and what's going on for the children, especially if later down the line you're involving other experts. Without that fact find, you haven't really got anything for them to really, you know, it misses it. So, okay, so I have got more questions, and I do wonder whether it might be worth us revisiting this, Andy, at some point. We can talk about that after, because I think it's such a complicated area. What I want to do, though, is to honour people's questions. So I'm going to bring the chat up. Okay, I'm going to go back to the start and try and do these in order. So first question was, can Cafcass speak to a 3-year-old? There's been a lot of false narratives and allegations being thrown. Yeah, although young, if they spoke to the child, the truth would become instantly apparent.
Yeah, they have to see every child and they measure that, and they have timescales for seeing children as well. It's always a professional judgment about how much, you know, do they interview the child? Now, I certainly wouldn't go and interview a 3-year-old. I'd want to be observing the 3-year-old with a parent. Hopefully both parents, that'd be fair, but they rarely do that these days. So I've done a lot more from observation. But it depends on the child. Some things you can just get a little bit out of a child. I certainly wouldn't be interviewing children kind of formally until they're like some proper sort of school age, really. And then, of course, when you get to teenagers, the interviewing process becomes a bit difficult. They have various tools, practice aids, they call them, to help them. So sometimes it's good for children to draw pictures. And I would always ask, because sometimes they forget, you know, if you've got like an 8-year-old child sort of upwards, you know, do you want my child to write a letter to the judge? And they should include that in the report. Sometimes they forget that. Some are very good at doing it, but that can be quite powerful because you've got the actual child's words there. But if they don't do a letter to the judge, I would certainly feed them quotes from the child and make sure they get quotes from the child, put it in their report, because that's powerful, because the actual words are in the report, and that's really powerful.
Yeah. So how can you make sure that you're interviewed first? Is that possible?
I saw that one and I tried to answer it. So I think that early contact with the Cafcass officer, you can just ask, you know, what your plan. They should be sharing. Back in the day, we were very hot at Cafcass on making sure that the FCA shared their plans, their case plans, and what they're going to do. They do that less so now, but it's quite okay to ask them, you know, what's going to happen. When you're going to see my child, where you're going to see my child, when you're going to see me, who you're going to see first, and have that conversation, really. And you're not interrogating them, you're just trying to find out. And once you've had your interviews, to make sure that you ask what's going to happen from here, and help them out. Really, you've really got to help them out. Consider them to be kind of lazy, but not so much lazy, but kind of really busy people who've got too much to think about. So really help them out. So say, would you, who else do you need to speak to? Do you want to speak to the school teacher, a health visitor, someone at nursery, or someone in my family you need to speak to? Or have you spoken to that social worker? They should have considered it, but maybe they haven't. They say, oh yes, yeah, I will speak to school. The school's got quite a lot to say because one parent went storming in and tried to remove the child the other day and cause a scene. So help them out with that. And also I think you can help them out by just asking questions like, what orders would you recommend that I would need to protect my child? Or where would you signpost me to get some extra help about parenting? And so by just asking those questions, you're kind of making them feel important, really, because they're able to kind of answer that. So rather than, they don't like to be told, no one likes to be told. So do it in terms of like asking questions. What do you think? They're not going to tell you what they think about what they're going to recommend, because they're going to keep their cards close to their chest. But you can get a little bit out of them, and yeah, so it's worth kind of asking them questions rather than just telling them and bombarding them with facts. And, oh, have you seen this text message? You know, would you like to see this video? Because no one will say no. But if you have got a key message or something, have it ready and show them. Make sure they see it. Make sure they make a note of it. So yeah, asking questions would be quite good. It's all part of that developing that relationship, really.
Absolutely. How much domestic abuse and coercive controlling training do Cafcass officers have, and how often is that training refreshed?
Yeah, that goes in kind of cycles. There's separate courses they have when they kind of join Cafcass. I mean, they're kind of new starter training, and then from time to time there are different teams have different workshops, which they might have that as a theme. But there've been like national training ever so often. And I think the kind of the best training really is the feedback they get from having their reports curated and having their files checked, because then they can say, Why didn't you consider fact finding here? Or there's a non-molestation order, but you haven't included it in your report. Why haven't you considered the importance of the non-molestation order? What impacts has it got? Why did you interview the perpetrator first and not the alleged victim? Why are you referring to the conflict between the parents when actually one parent has just put the other parent in hospital and they're not fighting? It's an actual, it's a dynamic of domestic abuse. So they're kind of underplaying that and talking about disharmony when actually you're talking about a kind of program of abuse. So Cafcass should be a lot better on domestic abuse with the new policy, the new training guidelines, and the updated pathway. The things that they're still going to be struggle with is parental alienation. They may not even consider, and don't even mention narcissism. In fact, if you feel your other parent is a narcissist, describe the behavior, describe what they've done. Don't call them a narcissist because think, oh, this parent's labeling the other parent. How do they know? Cafcass know. Well, when I left Cafcass, I did kind of raise the issue, but no one knew anything about narcissism, and that they probably still wouldn't be able to say what it is.
Yeah.
It's a serious issue, and you know, if you have got narcissistic behaviors, you're going to end up in the family court, aren't you? Really? So not surprising, there's going to be a big issue. But when I was at Cafcass, not so many months ago, they really didn't get it, and they probably don't get it now.
And that's worrying when, you know, if you got narcissists who marry or have children, they will end up in family court. They have to, because they can't compromise, they can't co-parent. It goes against their internal mechanisms. Yeah. And so many people within family court, and also public law as well, because actually Gwen actually did a load of research that said 60-70% of parents who maltreat their children have a personality disorder. So it's such a big gap in Cafcass's.
You can't change it. Don't pretend you can change it. You know, the only thing to do with those people is get out or dodge. Yeah. Really difficult when you've got children, though.
Absolutely.
With narcissism, what you're going to find, and I find it quite a lot, is that they're really expert at bringing the Cafcass officer on. They're much better than you at making sure that their gender is heard, and they're really nice. They're really good with the child. You know, you're just a moaning, over anxious parent. They're really great, and they get fooled really easily. This is what I mean about good judgment of the character. So if you are interviewed first, one of the things that I would do if you have got that kind of tendency in the other parent is to warn the Cafcass officer. Or when you go there, they're going to be really nice. They're going to do this. They're going to do that. But just remember when they threatened to kill me, and the police report that I got on that, and remember the time I went to hospital. So so when they go to interview that person, when they start doing that smoothing, the Cafcass officer is ready for it. They've heard it. Hopefully, they're not going to be fooled by it. So I would always warn them if that's going to happen.
How do Cafcass determine where to send children's letters? The parent the child mostly lives with, or
about the letters?
Yeah,
the indirect contact.
No, so you said at the start when they introduce, when they write a letter to introduce, would that letter go to the which parent would it go to?
Yeah, it goes to the resident parent. I can't see why you can't send a copy to either, really. But sometimes there's breaches of confidentiality, though, data breaches, because they're sent. If you send it to one parent, there was an example, sending it to one parent, and it had the address of the other parent they shouldn't have known about, really. But yeah, it's the resident parent, and it's sent to all children. Big debate in Cafcass. Why are we sending letters to babies? Oh, it's for them when they grow up, kind of thing. But it's their policy now. Every child gets a welcome letter.
Sorry, I am listening. I'm also trying to read the questions.
And they should also get an outcome letter as well. So Cafcass officer explaining what the court has decided or what their recommendations are. And children should be able to contact the Cafcass officer at any time to ask a question or update them. This is all part of the child-centered Cafcass approach.
This is maybe a more legal question, but of a case where fact-find hearing has been vacated, the parties are on a level playing field, how would this be dealt with?
Yeah, well, if it's vacated, then I guess parents have agreed that they're not going to have fact finding, or the court decided that something else needs to happen. So something else does need to happen. There needs to be a Cafcass assessment, or there needs to be some work so that the reasons for that for getting that hearing needs to be quite clear and understood. What's actually going to happen.
Okay, so this one I think is just a clarification question, essentially about if the other party's seen first, or the Cafcass officer kind of buys into the other, the perpetrator's narrative. Essentially, just to clarify, are we saying we don't raise that with the FCA, we raise that in court?
If they feel that the report in their view misrepresents who think what the other person, well, it may not misrepresent what the other parent has said, but you may feel that that's exactly not true. Yeah, I would kind of raise that in court. So the Cafcass officer is just reporting what they've heard or what they think they've heard. They're not going to change their reports. They don't like changing reports. They don't like being corrected. So yes, you'd bring that in court. Maybe you might want to go to a final hearing when you can give evidence about it. You might want to do a position statement. Just little things to kind of put them right. But as I said, it's about opinions, it's about positions, and there will be different positions, and that's the difficulty that the court have got with trying to work out where the child is in these positions, in these perspectives.
So follow-up question to that is around what trait, and again, something I can certainly answer from my perspective of being in that field, but it's probably changed a bit. Do FCAs receive any training whatsoever on their own unconscious bias, on their own experience, childhood experience, their own family dynamics that play into these things? Do they get any training in that whatsoever?
Well, certainly there's supervision should be able to deal with that, but in terms of unconscious bias, there has been in quite recent years training on unconscious bias. I didn't attend it for some reason, but I didn't deliver it, but my colleagues delivered it, and lots of practices did go. But I don't think that covered every practitioner. Just those that wanted to go, or I don't think it was a compulsory course. And then just because you attended a course on unconscious bias doesn't mean that you haven't got the unconscious bias. And the worst thing is that where you've made up your mind, and then you don't want to, it's kind of confirmation bias, isn't it? Where you don't want to change your opinion regarding, depending on the information you've got. So you look for the information that supports it. And unfortunately, that's what happens. They make their views very early on, and then they just miss new information. It becomes awkward to them, or their brains can't cope with it. That's kind of human psychology, really. So there's all kinds of biases. Might be cultural, might be gender biases. A lot of men feel that there's bias against them because most of the practitioners are female, and it doesn't always kind of work that way. But there's loads of things that can affect the relationship they have with you, how they might see the case.
And is there any way for someone to raise that without kind of having a go? Is it just going through the reports and pointing out the factual inaccuracies, not pointing out, you treated me unfairly? Like you said, about 10 minutes with one parent, half an hour with the other. That is easy to lead to bias, isn't it? The more information you get from one person, whether consciously or not, you take it on board more. But is it literally just going through the report and highlighting all of those factual inaccuracies rather than sort of addressing that elephant?
Yeah, so I pick your battles. You want to pick out the bits that are really, really key, and bring evidence, bring facts, really. So if you know that they had an interview of 20 minutes for yourself and 2 hours with the other person, if you know that, then certainly the court need to know that, because the court will need to ask questions. And you've always got the opportunity to have the Cafcass officer cross-examined, but they have to kind of explain these things. So hopefully you can get to agreement before then. But yeah, that is one of the challenges, unfortunately.
So next question is about a child who has limited English? I mean, it's a young child, but in general, when there's language barriers, how does that?
Yeah. Well, they should always have access to interpreters, and they need to make sure they get the right interpreter. Um, the bit that they're meant to be really good at is engagement with children. So it's important that they do understand the language, and it may not just be language. It may be about the child's age. The child might have a disability. There's all kinds of reasons why a child will find it difficult to share their voice, there's also thinking about using pictures, and other kind of tools that they can use to kind of express how they're feeling. But yeah, the Cafcass really do need to get to what the child's needs, wishes, and feelings are. And that's a really, again, a big part of the welfare checklist that must be covered. And as a parent, you will know the child's wishes and feelings. They will need to get them directly from the children, but I would make sure that you kind of share that and see whether they get kind of the same kind of story, really. You should know what your child's needs are, what they're saying, and I'd make sure that the Cafcass officer knows that, and it doesn't just rely on whether the interview with the child goes really well.
I guess though that's where the risk of parents that are really good at manipulating a child can almost.
Yeah.
Oh, I find that quite concerning, where if a child is saying the exact same, not in the language, but they're saying their needs directly align with the other parent, to me that's a bit of a red flag, because actually children see things very differently and they have their own opinions in terms of they would. Again, I guess it comes back to that balance and taking on board more of the context of the family. And this is one of my concerns with what's going through at the moment, is of course children's voices are important, but only if it's their authentic voice. If it's not, and how do we've got to be clear on, is it the child's voice or is it the child's manipulated voice? And so again, I'm conscious of time. We are over 12 already. We've got a lot more questions in the chat.
Consistency or coaching, there's two ways of saying it, really. Is the child being consistent, or are they being repetitive? And that's something that they have to work out.
Okay, so Andy, are you happy to stay on for another few minutes?
Yeah, certainly. Yeah.
Okay. So I don't normally do this, but it's fascinating. So not that the others aren't fascinating, but obviously my background's social work, so I find it personally quite interesting as well. Right. Question. This is about basically an opinion really on one of the tools that the Cafcass officers use, which is scoring their parents on a scale of 1 to 10. How does that sit with you?
Yeah, well, I think the whole thing about tools or practice aids that they call them now, because tools apparently is not a nice word, apparently, they've been told. So practice aids they will talk about. Just because they've included them doesn't mean that their assessment is good, really. But there was a big campaign to use them because it kind of validates and boosts the assessment process. It looks good if you use the tool. And some of them are actuarial tools where they do kind of score, add up. Others are just checklists, really. I would, if too much weight's put on them, I would challenge them. Sometimes in the report, they said, "Oh, I've used this domestic abuse tool, I've used that." And if you think, well, how have you used it? We haven't seen it. We don't know what was it told you. So I would certainly kind of ask them more about that, or the court would need to find out more about that. But yeah, you can hide behind tools, really. Good basic assessment skills and analysis is what's needed. And assessment is a little bit easier because they can ask the questions. They can have a little checklist. Analysis is harder because it means you have to think a bit and you have to weigh up and balance and look at meaning and look at outcomes. And that's where Cafcass continue to struggle, really, with that analysis, and then having recommendations that logically follow from that.
I totally agree. I suppose for me, the score thing, it feels, I worry about that, the impact that has on a child when being asked to score your parents. It can feel there's a guilt element that could be, being put onto the children around.
Never ask a child to score their parents. Never.
Exactly.
Never
It
do
doesn't feel right.
anything that provides them. No, I'd never do it.
No. Okay. So, can you ask for your officer to be trained in domestic abuse or coercive control, or for a more experienced officer, or again, will that pee off
I'd ask them what training they've had. I'd ask them about the training they've had and how recent it is. Or I'd ask just to show that you know about the new updated domestic abuse policy is quite good. It shows that you're actually on it a bit, so they can't muck you about. But don't know too much. Do they think that you're just a kind of a know-it-all? They like to be the person who knows it. So yeah, I don't think you can't make them go on training, and changing the Cafcass officer is really difficult because they have problems enough to allocate it. And they don't like to be told, no, we don't like this practitioner, we have a new one. But they never change practitioner unless the practitioner leaves, and then they have to. And so it is a lottery, and if you get a good one, fantastic. If you get one that you have problems right from the start, it does make your life a lot more difficult, and that's just a bad fact, really.
Is that something that you could bring up though in court around the lack of training? So when you're challenging their analysis, for example, or their assessment, you can say this lacks an understanding because the officer themselves stated that they hadn't done this training. Because it would undermine, wouldn't it, if you weren't trained in something and yet you were writing a report based on that? It would, in my eyes, that would undermine its credibility to a certain extent.
Yeah, well, I certainly would. It's so important because it impacts on how much you see of your child or whether the child lives with you. These are big issues that impact on the family for years and years and years. So I would not miss an opportunity to ask about their credentials and their training. The Cafcass officers used to write it at the beginning of the reports. They don't anymore. They just assume that they're trained. But in recent years, Cafcass officers are less experienced than they used to. When I joined Cafcass, I had 15 years of child protection court work. Often the guardians were managers, higher managers that wanted to work with children again. Now they may have a year or two in maybe 3 in the local authority. Maybe they haven't even done court reports. Maybe they've worked in other teams, fostering teams, etc. So that does impact, I think, on the quality of, and it's so much more competitive. When I joined Cafcass, that was it. You would never go back to the local authority. Better paid. It's the pinnacle of your career. Now you see people come and they leave and go back to the local authority. Never used to happen, but in recent years that is happening more and more.
What if the other parent pretends to engage with the parenting plan or mediation, but actually uses it to stoke conflict or not agree to anything through solicitors? Disguised compliance, which is a red flag.
Because I've had cases where I've done a parenting plan and I want you to follow it. I think, well, no, a parenting plan is something that you discuss and agree together. Courts cannot micromanage families. That's what they clearly said when the CAP was developed. They can make broad orders about who the child spends time with and lives with. So parenting plans really think about trying to future-proof things like, where's the child going on holiday? What's going to happen at Christmas? What's going to happen on birthdays? What's going to happen with school events? You're going to go to a parents' evening? No, I'm going to. So it reduces those opportunities for conflict. And it should also, what I have includes a kind of emotional contract where you agree how you're going to resolve differences, because differences will come up. So what is the communication? So it's important to share if you think it's a genuine attempt to use the parenting plan. And I think a bit of work needs to be done with both parents before they start writing. I don't think you should just go on a course or read the Cafcass website and then say, right, I'm doing the parenting plan.
I think we covered this earlier with regards to what's the best way to present evidence. You basically said just give behavioural details and specific examples of that.
Clear and succinct, and don't try and tell the whole story, but mention the kind of the most serious and the most recent. And in fact, in the training in domestic abuse policy, those questions they should be asking: when was the most recent example? When was the worst example? And what are the patterns? But if they don't do that for them. You don't just leave it to the Cafcass officer. I think that's my comment, really. You need really to be three things: be prepared, develop that relationship, and have an understanding about what they do and why they do it. And that gives you kind of sort of knowledge, really, having that understanding. So be really prepared, have those questions, make sure that you feed in the information that you want to see in that report, make sure that they really hear your story. You're not being manipulative, you're just making sure that you get your story across. But it is so important what they say in their section 7 report.
Absolutely. Right, this is about long-term supervision orders. If no scope of change in the perpetrator of CCB, failed DAPS, assessed as poor prognosis, but supervised contact seems okay, what would Cafcass recommend? Stop contact?
Yeah, they can. It's very vague about contact going forward, really. So they might say, well, no contact at the moment till court decides. So yeah, I think where there's real kind of concerns about risk, if they're really bold and it's really clear, they should be asking the court to make an order for no contact. So not just say no contact, but an order for no contact. But those hopefully kind of rare cases. So if they're worried about contact, they will talk about indirect contact. And really, technically, a video call is not, or a telephone call is not indirect contact. It's direct because they're able to talk directly to the child. So indirect contact may be a letter that another parent opens and reads and then passes on. Maintaining that relationship, that identity is important for children. So at the very least, those letters are quite important, but often find that parents kind of give up on that because it's just too much for them, particularly if they don't get letters back. And in terms of supervised contact, in my mind, it can't be an ongoing thing forever and ever, particularly at a contact centre. But maybe if you've got a member of the public, a relative who can be involved, often that can be longer term. But I'd want to see some change, some shift in the other parent so that they can demonstrate, actually, let's go back to court and I can have unsupervised contact. The onus is on you to make those changes to demonstrate that it is now safe to do that. Why couldn't you have supervised contact? It may be the initial stages because they're not sure. So their assessment is, well, we're going to assume risk. So you're guilty until proven not guilty, really. But once you've done the assessment, supervised contact should only be for those situations where you really feel that it's going to be unsafe for the child to spend time with the other parent when no one's looking, particularly when it's overnight staying in contact in the home.
Okay. This is one that comes up quite a bit, is that they have training in LGBTQ relationships and particularly domestic abuse in those, because I've dealt with quite a lot of those dynamics, and the same issues appear within those situations.
Yeah.
Particularly, what I found is the birth mother, they're the cases I've worked on, seems to get prioritized and almost seen as being the more of the mother than the other mother. I'm just wondering if they would receive any training around that.
It's kind of mentioned in training. There may be some particular kind of workshops, things that come up, or in their kind of practice week they have once a year. It might be themed there. It's more likely to be there's a member of the team might be really good on these things, and maybe the cases go in their direction. That'd be really good. But there are kind of champions around the country. So if those cases come up, they should be able to contact those champions and talk through. So the champions will know it back, inside out, and should be able to help them through that. So, but they need to think, oh, there is a champion, I need to contact the champion, or hopefully a manager will tell them to do that. So not everyone will be confident with that. There's a whole range of things in terms of children's special needs, in terms of kind of other community groups as well, where they have a little bit of knowledge, but not enough knowledge, and so they need to go to champions.
And could a parent ask for them for that? Could a parent say,
well, that's what I mean about understanding. Yeah, having that knowledge that there are champions in Cafcass. So you can ask them, is there a champion in Cafcass that knows about Romany or traveller communities? Maybe you should go. And there are, so not just kind of training and workshops, but there are knowledge bites, to call them. So there are actual written kind of, there's e-learning packages. And so, it's having the time and the forethought to do it. But if I was a practitioner, and I had a case where perhaps there was some neurodiversity and I didn't feel confident about it. First place I would go, I talked to my manager, but I would go to the e-learning packages, see whether there's a some e-learning on that, or there's a workshop coming up, or there's a champion that can help me. The onus is on them really to really kind of upskill themselves so they can do the best for the families.
Yeah, but parents can kind of point them a little bit in the direction. So this question, I think we covered it again a little bit earlier, was around a child who speaks quite well. Like they maybe have an older language range than a normal 8-year-old child. How can a parent, how do you show that actually this is just normal speech for a child and not coached speech for a child?
Yeah, so I think it's not so much their kind of language and the words that they know and their vocabulary. I think it's the types of words that they use, the phrases that they use, things that they shouldn't know about. And I mean, I've got an 8-year-old who was exactly like that, who but they were able to kind of show me their bedroom, and they showed me the books that they read, and I asked them about the books that they're reading. It's quite clear that they're reading books beyond their age. So in my mind, it's quite understandable that they're using that kind of language because that's what they're kind of exposing themselves to. So it's not so much whether they're using adult language, it's the kind of words. And in this particular child actually refers to the dad as him. And I'm not quite sure in my mind whether there's something they picked up from their mother or that's what the word that they use themselves. So it's just ask. I think asking for that detail, you can then kind of sort of get to it where you can see whether they're consistent in it and ask again in different ways. And a skilled practitioner should be able to kind of get to that, but they need to be wary of it first, really, and not just make assumptions, oh, they're being coached or they're not being coached. Spending time with children, that's the thing.
Well, yeah, but it doesn't always happen, does it? Unfortunately, due to constraints.
They get one visit, really. Yeah, might have a welcome letter or a welcome call, but it's just one visit. So a lot of pressure on that child to get it.
So if a parent is aware that their child speaks that way and is worried that they might come across as being coached, is there anything like, can they do that? Can they explain actually their reading age is 10 or 12 if they're only 8, and you speak to school will tell you, that this is how they
I think it's safer not to mention it at all, really.
Yeah, okay.
Like the lady duck, that's too much. Well, I mean, why are they telling me that? They're trying to influence me, trying to, shape the agenda. So hopefully they find out themselves when they speak to school, or they come back to me and go, oh, their language is really good. Oh, yes, because have you noticed? Oh, I might leave a few of their books out so they can see the books. But yeah, I wouldn't be saying to them, oh, if my child uses such and such a word, it's not because I coach them, it's because they're really good at reading. Yeah, I wouldn't do that.
No,
alarm bells.
Yep. Okay. Someone has raised a stage 2 complaint with social services due to professional conduct and is asking whether or not it might go against them.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, social services, we talk about local authority, it's a whole different kettle of fish, really, because they do Section 7 reports. They don't really like them. Cafcass debate them, do them. There's a protocol that they do them if they're kind of currently involved or recently involved with the family. And sometimes it's the thing you give a student to do. They're not kind of highly valued during welfare reports. Although I have seen some really good welfare reports done by social workers and local authority who spent more time with the family than Cafcass do. So it's kind of, again, a bit of a lottery. But the general point about making complaints, I would leave that to the end, unless you think it's going to really influence and get what you need to get in the proceedings. You can just leave it too late and make the complaint. Yeah, is it really going to change things for you? Are you worried they're going to think even worse of you? But I think it's for your own mental health, really. And also, it may affect other people if they behave with you like that, or they can behave with another parent like that. So yeah, it is a dilemma, and they hate complaints. But in Cafcass, private law practitioners almost see it as a badge of honor, really, because you're just if you haven't had a complaint, you're not doing your job properly, really. And it's the bread and butter where you've got one parent saying one thing, one parent saying nothing, you're bound. And the practitioners always complain about the parent that they feel they're disagreeing with. One that
Yeah.
they seem to be agreeing with doesn't tend to complain.
Is it true as well that they've got about 3 years to complain anyway? So that even if they don't do it at a time, they can do it within.
Yeah,
They can
you
do
think,
it
well,
after that particular set of proceedings.
I would do it in proceedings or just after. I said, why would you leave it so long, really? By
No,
that
but I'm
time,
saying what I mean is they don't have to do it at that moment. They have got time.
no,
They can wait. I
but
mean, I don't know
yeah,
what the timing is, but
yeah, I certainly wouldn't wait years because the practitioners either become a manager or left by that time. So
But what I
yeah,
mean is you don't have to approach it then and there in that moment. You
no,
can come back to it at a time where it's more convenient for you, where you've got more headspace to
yeah,
do that.
absolutely. And you may need to kind of step back and think how you're feeling and what is the purpose of this? What are you trying to achieve?
Yeah.
That motivation is a good question to ask yourself.
So next question is, they've been in and out of court for over 12 years. Children are now teenagers and are actually able to speak a little bit more about what their experience was, but they're struggling to sort of overcome the previous narrative. Any advice on how they can move things forward and away from that past narrative? That I guess some of that bias maybe is coming through with what they've read previously.
Yeah. Oh, it's. I mean, if you're in proceedings for 12 years, you've got to ask, what have the courts been doing? What have Cafcass and other professionals been doing? And I imagine if it's got 12 years, it's probably gone to Rule 16.4, and the guardian's been appointed and the children made parties. Not necessarily, because things can bounce in and out of court as well. So it'd be kind of lots of future litigations. Yeah, I think the practitioner will need to recognise just the damage of what's happened over time and how there's layers of influence. But also that as children get older, their perspectives change. But it may take a few more years, and for them to leave home where they can actually have a fuller perspective of looking at their parents. I know that I did that when I was a child. I was very much influenced by my mother, who kind of used me as an emotional crutch. And when I left home, I said, well, my dad's not that bad. And it's kind of, oh, well, you don't live with him anymore, kind of thing. So yeah, it's I suppose just as they get to that teenage, they're more able to express themselves, but probably less willing to want to talk to an adult. They really want to get and be with their friends. They don't want to have to deal with it, really.
It's a tricky one at that age, isn't it? Especially with hormones and everything going on as well. If having indirect contact only by the time of Section 7, will Cafcass want to see copies of the letters being sent to or from the children?
Yeah, they should do. They should offer them to see them. And there could be a court direction that they look at them and comment on them. Sometimes I've got a case where they've been sent to the solicitors and solicitors look at them. I have a particular view about letters. I would really, unless they're actually horrendous, I think just a letter that one parent writes to a child should just be sent to the child. There's always going to be kickback. There's always going to be things that one parent's going to have to pick up. And so I'm a bit uncomfortable when a parent gets a letter and then that they are trying to kind of correct it and say, no, send it back. You need to rephrase this, rephrase that, change that. And then it ceases to be the real letter of that parent. So it is always going to cause difficulties, and it's going to be difficult for the resident parent sharing that letter because they're going to try and encourage a child to write back. There'll be loads of questions that come up from it. And it's a bit like kind of contact, really. A child comes back distressed after the contact. We instantly think, contact's bad. We've got to stop contact. Well, it may just be a natural response to the confusion and the conflict that the child feels. And maybe they need to have more contact. Let's don't assume just because they're stressed after contact, it's something that's gone on in contact or it's bad for them. So this is what I mean about just having that kind of subtlety and of understanding of stepping back and having that analysis. And that's what we hope our FCAs and Cafcass will have, that ability to just think logically and analytically. But yes, I would certainly don't assume they're going to do it. Ask them to help if you want them to help. They should be able to offer help to the parent to write in the first place, because I've certainly done that in my role. I've helped a parent to write a letter. Say, well, I wouldn't mention this. Just keep it child-centered, write about this, keep it short. Don't try and excuse yourself or talk about the other person, just keep it about them. And it's kind of worked well. So there's one thing I think a parent should ask for help from Cafcass if they're writing letters in proceedings. They can be so restorative, which is really important.
Okay, so I'm not sure we're going to be able to get through all of these. I'm just going to try and pick. So 11-year-olds, are their views taken seriously? I guess, again, going back to the context and the level of understanding and all of that. But yeah, overall.
The 11-year-old should know what's what, yeah. But don't assume that Cafcass is going to put loads of weight on what they say. The rule is the older the child is, the more weight they should put on what they're saying. But they should always put in the context of welfare. So it's not a case of the child says this, therefore X happens. There's a whole kind of welfare complex context that they've got to put it into.
What if the child doesn't want to be interviewed?
Yeah, really difficult. I think the Cafcass officer will need to go back to court, talk to the manager, go back to court. Maybe the court might want to make an order, because in the past they would just say, "Oh, child didn't want to be interviewed, let's ignore it." Or parent says, "You don't need to see my child because I can tell you what they're going to say." Yeah, it doesn't often happen, but they should find ways of making the child feel confident about it, really, and ask whether the child wants to be interviewed. I mean, it's quite debatable whether interviewed should be interviewed in the office, at home. There's one parent think that's unfair because it's the family home, or interviewed at school, which again has its own problems whether children should be interviewed at school. But you find a lot of practitioners will interview children in school, even though the Children's Board, or Cafcass, the Justice Board, had said in the past, don't interview children at school because that's their safe haven. But Cafcass officers do it frequently.
This is a tricky one. Basically, the child is saying they don't want to go to contact, but the court order states that they must. What can the parent do?
Yeah, well, again, I mean, that you've got to really need to look at the circumstances of that individual case, but generally that kind of thing does happen, and it needs someone to work alongside the child and trying to find out what is going on, and is it because there is some alienation going on? Is it because they're frightened? Is it because of the conflict? There will be reasons for that, and you need to kind of get to the kind of bottom of that. I think it's so difficult for a parent to force a child to go because of the court order. And I hear people say, well, children don't want to go to a dentist, they don't want to go to school. Do we stop them going to a dentist just because they don't like going to a dentist? True, but I think it's so much more complex and different when you're working with family relationships. So it needs some time, which don't always professionals have, spend with that family to kind of get to the bottom of that. And there are different ways of developing that relationship. And sometimes children say that the parents say, "Oh, my child doesn't see the parent," but when they observe the other parent, they're having a fantastic time. And children mostly is because they're conflicted and they really know about the conflict. And it's easier not to say they want to see the other parent because they know it's going to upset the other parent. It's such a difficult minefield for children.
Yeah, it really is.
But let's make assumptions. Let's try and get to the bottom of that particular case. Making assumptions is really dangerous.
I think that's been one of my biggest frustrations, has been it feels like they don't ask enough questions. They're not nosy enough. Why are they not asking? Well, why do you think that? Why do you feel that? I'm not saying in those terms, but why are they not going deeper on that? Because it feels like actually some stuff of this is just under the surface. If they would just ask the right question, then it might open up more for them. But it feels like they ask one question, get one answer, and they're happy with that, rather than looking for anything around it.
You've got to be forensic. You've got to be nosy. You've got to be like a detective.
Yeah.
But at the end, it's the court. It's the court that makes the decisions. You're making analysis. You're making recommendations.
Well, they do. A lot of courts do take what Cafcass say as being, they're deemed to be the experts. So I think a lot of parents feel very afraid, and it's coming up in the chat here that unfortunately this isn't giving them a lot of reassurance of working with
Yeah.
Cafcass. And I love
Yeah.
your honesty, and I feel that if you can understand something, then it gives you there's more power to you, because you can work, you know,
Yeah.
you can almost
Yeah.
let go of some of the
Well,
anxiety around it, because
yeah. And some parents have engaged my services because they are a bit worried about Kafka's, what they've read, what they've heard, or their early experiences. Sometimes maybe it's too late in the proceedings. But what they find by engaging me is if they decide to share that with Kafka, you get different responses like, "Oh, I've never heard of him," kind of thing, or some will have done, some would have done. Some might have known about the team that I worked for that had a certain reputation. But I think it the message that it gives positively in two ways. One is it shows that you are interested in co-parenting. You're engaging someone to help you co-parent, to reduce the conflict, to increase the communication. You're not an awkward parent. You're trying to do the right thing here. So you engage someone to do it with you. That's a plus. The second thing is it can be a little bit scary for the FCA. If they know someone who's read 1,000 Section 7 reports is reviewing their work and coaching the parent. Well, if that was me, I would make sure that I was on my top form. I wouldn't muck them about. I would make sure that I've done all the training, that I've looked at all the guidelines, I'm using the right tools, and I'm not making assumptions, because what I do not, the worst thing for a Cafcass officer, apart from complaints, is to be made a fool of in court, to have a judge dress them down, or for them to give evidence and found that they've not done an assessment properly, or they're being biased.
Yeah.
And so if there's someone like myself in the background and they know about it, then hopefully they're going to be a little bit more cautious about how they behave and what they do, because I
Absolutely.
know.
And I'll share your details with the toolkit that I'll send out in a couple of days, once I've got time to do it, but also once the recording and the transcript's all done, so I'll be able to take your words and I'll add all the details into that as well. I have actually got a couple of questions that were sent in that I'm going to just quickly bring up, and then we'll call it a day. Any of the questions I haven't looked at in the chat, you will get a response to them. So both the Section 7 and the psychological assessment have identified clear indicators of alienating behaviours, including coaching, enmeshment and attachment disruption. Therefore, how appropriate is it for a guardian who didn't author either report to frame the case primarily as one of parental conflict, especially when there's no evidence of conflict from the targeted parent? And is it suitable that the guardian recommends the child having a direct line to the alienating parent during limited time with the targeted parent, given those concerns around the relationship? And surely that will, reinforce that control and undermine the contact.
That's really brave or foolhardy of the FCA, who then becomes a guardian, to do that. On what basis are they setting out? That's what I don't want to know. Why they're saying it's parental conflict when you have why would you want to go against an expert report? Hopefully that expert has the training and be able to talk about alienation in a way that perhaps you wouldn't. So that's either foolhardy or really brave to do that. But so I'd want to see the evidence for that, and I want to have that tested in court. Because alienation is like domestic abuse, it's on a continuum, like mental health is on a continuum. And so it depends how damaging it is, what's the impact on the particular children, what's the likelihood of it continuing, what's the motivation for it. So all those things need to be kind of looked at by the court, really. So yeah, how has that guardian been managed by their own manager, but also by the children's solicitor? Surely the children's solicitor should be saying to them, "Are you sure you're talking about parental conflict? We've got a report in court where it clearly says alienation." Foolhardy, or they are absolutely brilliant and better than the psychologists or what have you.
Yes. Okay. How to get a Cafcass to see? They've used the term covert narcissist behavior when he acts like he cares for a child, but the child, in reality, he doesn't.
Yeah. They're going to struggle with it because I don't think they understand that there's, again, narcissism is on a continuum as well, and there's different sorts of narcissism. So talk about the covert or the vulnerable narcissist. There's another term for covert narcissism. And I think it's there's a it's a kind of educate yourself on it really, and there's a very good practitioners who can help with that, and some very good books. But I would, if you're getting in those cases, you really need legal support. Make sure you get a lawyer who understands narcissism. And I've read the book. Where's the book that I've read recently? Narcissism and Family Law: A Practitioner's Guide. Dr. Supra McKenna and Karen Walker. Karen Walker's a lawyer. Dr. Supra McKenna is a therapist. Really good advice, mainly for lawyers, but also mediators and other people like myself, about what to expect, the behaviours to expect, and how to confront it. So if you really feel that you're in that situation, and it's not just a friend who says, "Oh, they're a narcissist," but you really feel that they tick the boxes, then make sure you get a lawyer that can help you. Because I wouldn't assume that Cafcass is going to really understand it. So I would keep away from labels and just keep to behaviours and ask them whether, how they think that behaviour is going to impact negatively on my child, and hopefully they should think about it.
And there's lots of tools on the Get Cut Ready website. This is what I deal with all the time. So everything that I've created is to help you to present these situations in the best possible way, and it aligns everything with what Andy's saying today as well. I've submitted 28 documents outlining the verbal abuse I experienced during the relationship, supported by audio recordings and structured using evidence tracker. Given the possible emotional impact this abuse has had on the children and their current reluctance to see me, how will Cafcass use this information in the Section 7 assessment, if at all? And will anything in the Section 7 report influence the outcome or consideration of a non-molestation order application, or are they viewed separately?
Yeah, well, I think they are separate, and I think you bring separate evidence to it. But the Cafcass officer may take note of it and comment on it that you think they should do. I think it's Winston Churchill that said, the more he's got to read, the less he's going to read it. Cafcass people are very busy, and the last thing they want is like, "Oh, can you read this big email?" or "Can you look at this video?" or "Can you?" So I would cherry pick and make sure they've got the best bit of evidence for them to look at. If there's more and it's important, then I would have it, make sure that goes into fact finding and they can consider all that evidence. And sometimes just the quantum of it and over time is really powerful. So you really are presenting a summary and asking Cafcass. I've got messages from 2020 to 2024 where they've been abusive to me. Do you want to see them? Do you think I should put them into court? So kind of give it to them to kind of think about. But key bits I would share to them, but I wouldn't drip feed them, because at best they may not read it, and at worst they're just going to label you as a complaining, awkward parent.
I had a question on that actually from a case that I worked on where Cafcass have said they won't read anything that isn't within the court bundle.
Yeah, but there are issues of making sure that if they show you anything, then the other side need to see. So there's got that. You need to become sort of clear about that, really.
Okay.
But yeah, it's sitting back and thinking what is really going to help your case. I remember years ago when I had a student doing a Section 7, parent wanted to share videos of their child having nightmares. I thought, well, I felt awkward about watching a video of a child having nightmares, but my interpretation, how do I know that was directly relating to what their dad did, and that's what they're trying to prove? And it could be anything really. So think carefully about information you're going to share. It needs to kind of hit home and be game, set, and match, not something that's vague or something that they can. So I got a situation where a mum's said, "Oh, my relationship was at this time with the dad, because look, here's a photograph I got from the cloud of him and his mates." But yeah, but how do we know that you took the photograph? Are you in the photograph? So just think through forensically how the evidence might be seen.
It's that mindset, isn't it, of all the looking for all the ways that the other party will pull it apart. Pull your own evidence apart, and if it still stands up, put it in, and if it doesn't, again, this is really hard when you're traumatized. I get all of that, which is why I've created the tools that I've created. But okay, last two questions. Given the history of the children being too fearful to disclose their lived experience due to threats and pressure at home, and the reported coercive behaviour of their stepmother, including serious safeguarding concerns raised by the 14-year-old, how can I present this to Cafcass to ensure manipulation and alienating behaviours are properly understood and investigated, especially when my ex-partner is now objecting to the children being spoken to?
Yeah, well, one, they why are they objecting to them being spoken to? They can't do that. The court, there's an assumption in the legal proceedings that the children will be seen. So that's a bad play on their part, objecting to children being seen. What have you got to hide? And I think it's just succinctly and clearly given the Cafcass officer the information, and by sharing, I would ask the question. I know you need to see my children. I know you need to get the voice of my children, and you need to understand how they've been traumatized and the impact on them. But what happens if I feel that they just too traumatized to speak to you? What are you going to do? So I put it back onto them, ask how they're going to do it, and therefore you put it in their mind. It's going to be difficult. What you don't want is them to go and see the children, come back. Well, I interviewed the children, and they said nothing. Therefore, nothing's happened. So you need to kind of set that up a bit more really by making them realise that actually could happen, that they're going to be too traumatized to say. And as professional social workers, they should understand how trauma works on children and what they feel they can say, and if they're conflicted or they're scared, what they're going to say and what they're not going to say. There's different ways of finding out what the children's needs, wishes, feelings are.
So I think in that example there, it was the other parent is saying, no, don't see the children. This parent is saying, my child has experience that they want to share, but it's being blocked by the other parent. Is it down to just relying on the Cafcass officer to ask the right questions and basically maybe make some assumptions around why that?
Yeah, so you want to make sure you know what the Cafcass officer plans to do in seeing the children, and if they're not, or there's any difficulty with it, I would certainly be raising it in court, because the court can make an order that the children are seen and assessed. And they can do that. They will want the children to be seen and assessed. It's really dangerous to go through proceedings with the children not being seen and not being heard. And there's always options for children to go to court, speak to the judge themselves.
So, and this comes up quite a lot as well. This is about 17-year-old, although they're 17 and therefore too old to be considered and formally included in proceedings. If the 14-year-old is able to disclose how both siblings have been silenced, manipulated, and psychologically controlled, particularly by the stepmother, could this provide sufficient grounds for Cafcass or the court to reconsider the 17-year-old's position and recognise that her expressed views may not reflect her genuine wishes?
Yeah, I think the court would be concerned about making orders for someone who's 17, so close to majority. But I'll be certainly asking the Cafcass officer about whether they want to speak to the 17-year-old so they get their perspective as well, so they can compare it with the younger child rather than just relying on the younger child, so they can talk directly about their experiences. And they will do that, and they can do that. Yeah, I've got a case where someone's talking about maybe an older child that now find out might have been sexually abused by one of the parents. And I think it's important that that child is seen by the Cafcass officer as well as the actual younger child in the family, because it paints a picture of what might happen to this younger child, and paints a picture of the risk of parenting.
Okay, I think I've got through most of the questions. Any that I think some of them there's been crossover, so I think we've broadly answered everyone's questions. Maybe if we've not answered them specifically, hopefully through the entire length of our conversation, which I'm so grateful that you've gone over. I appreciate that you've considerably gone over, so I apologise.
It's a massive subject, and it's just so important.
It really is.
Do not leave it to chance.
No, and I think again, I mean, nothing that you've said to me is surprising. I think we all know that there's a gap. There's a gap in understanding of FCAs around these complex dynamics, particularly when there is a personality disordered parent. And we know that family court as a whole doesn't necessarily handle these cases particularly well. But also, the complexity of that. And it's not just because you think they're a narcissist doesn't necessarily mean they are a narcissist. You know, mental health is such a spectrum that it might be PTSD and it presents in a certain way, for example. But I think that, and whilst there's a real sadness around that, because Cafcass are seen as being almost like the right-hand man to a judge. Like the judge will go, okay, what do you think? And they'll feed back. And if they're so untrained or lacking in experience, or, you know, all the things that you very openly and honestly shared with us, which I really appreciate, that can be really worrying for parents going into court, knowing that actually this part of the process isn't going to be a true reflect, or runs the risk of not being helpful, and actually could in some ways be more traumatizing for both the parent and the children, just by the nature of the questions or the narrative that is presented. But again, I'm very much about empowering.
Yeah, it's how it's asked, how it's presented, how you're treated.
Yeah.
Yeah, it can be a bit of a lottery.
But I think knowing that empowers you to, you know, almost not, it's not right, but this is the system that we've got. It's the only system that we've got. And so all you can do, and this is something I talk about all the time, is the only bit you have any control over is you and how you present it. And as long as you present it consistently with clarity, then that's going to be present through the Section 7s, through the court, you know, your statements, you know, what your bundles, everything. As long as this consistent message is sent, then that's the bit that you can do. That's the bit that you have got control over. The other bits you don't, and you've just got to do the best that you can with your information. Again, going back to, that's everything that I've created is to help you to do that. So what I think, for most of you, if you are having these worries, if you know, left this and thought, oh my God, this lottery, how am I going to increase my odds in the lottery? Andy, speak to Andy, book in, just get him to review what's gone on. Ask him to have a look at, you know, where you're at and get his insider advice. He'll be honest. He's been not overly as in a bad thing, but you've really shared goes on the inside, which I'm so grateful for. So speak to him and he can guide you. None of us have a magic wand. I want to be very clear. We don't have a magic wand. We can't magically say, do this and this will happen. But what we can do is we can give you the best possible chance. And like I said, sometimes it is about giving that extra layer of accountability to professionals. If they know you're working with someone who has a level of expertise, then they're going to raise their game a little bit. So even if it's just for that, even if you've just come on this, drop his name. So I was sort of speaking with Andy Hyde the other day. You've heard from the horse's mouth. I'd use that if I could. You know, if you with Cafcass, I would say, oh yeah, I was on a workshop with Andy Hyde the other day. And Cafcass worker. Again, if it just gives you that little bit of an edge for them to go, oh, okay, I know, I've heard that name. I need to, you know, I need to make sure I'm delivering my best. Anything that can, you know, give you a bit. But I will provide Andy's contact information when I send everything out to you, so you can reach out. If you're desperate to do it, it is on the website. Andy, do you want to tell everyone your email address, the best way for them to contact you, and your website?
Yeah. Well, the website is, I'm so lucky to have the domain, familycourtmentoring.com, and my phone number and my Gmail, which is Andy S. Hyde as in Jekyll, HYDE, @gmail.com. Happy just to discuss things, see whether it's going to be right for you. We can have a one-off, or, you know, I can kind of mentor you through the proceedings, you know, if that's what you wanted, and be there in the background. I can access a Mackenzie friend. I do anything to help, really. That's what I'm trying to do before I fully retire and put up and, you know, retire as a social worker. I can do that. I do anything to help children.
And that's brilliant. Like I said, I genuinely really appreciate you not only coming and doing this, but also going over and above with your time and your information. So yeah, we need more Andys is what they're saying. So thank you for that. The recording will come out within 48 hours. Obviously, it's got to Google got to do their thing and download it all and send it to me, which probably happens sometime this afternoon, but maybe tomorrow. I've actually got appointments tomorrow, so I might not get to do it. So give me till late on Wednesday, and I will have got it out to you with a toolkit, which will be a summary of everything we've talked about and with some real key points for you to follow to help you present your case based on the advice Andy's done and obviously everything that I've created within Get Cut Ready as well. And I hope you've all found this helpful. Getting a lot of good feedback as well. So I really appreciate it. And yeah, take care, everyone. Thank you for giving us your Monday morning / afternoon.
All right. Have a good rest of the day, everybody.
Andy. Take care.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Bye.